we were seeing some of the patterns that were working and helping teams get the work done more efficiently, with faster flow, with better feedback loops. And we were also seeing some of the patterns that didn't work so well.
I certainly see many organizations as effectively blind. Imagine an amoeba-like proto-animal that basically doesn't have any eyes or doesn't have any ability to sense anything. It just kind of bumps around in its environment.
Hey everyone, welcome to Dev Interrupted. I'm your host, Dan Lyons, and today I'm joined by Manuel Pais and Matthew Skelton, writers of the book Team Topologies, Organizing Business and Technology Teams for Fast Flow. Guys, thanks so much for joining us on the pod today.
It's good to be here, thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we dive into your book, I'd love to give the audience a chance to get to know you a little bit better. So, Manuel, you've been a thought leader in DevOps for years now. In fact, you helped found DevOps Lisbon. Can you tell us a little bit about what brought you into the organizational and team design space?
Yeah, it still feels weird when I hear someone saying I'm a thought leader, but yes, I've had that tag from Tech Beacon and others. Basically, I've been involved with DevOps since around 2011. So pretty much more or less when it started, a couple of years later. And so for me, it made a lot of sense because my background is in computer science. And I had a number of different roles from development to testing to build and release engineering. And so this idea of we need to break down the silos and get teams to collaborate when they need to get work on things that affect both teams or multiple teams, and that we cannot just be working silos and expect things to improve. That made a lot of sense to me. And then I started DevOps Lisbon with a friend of mine a few years later, which has been quite successful. And I am from Lisbon in Portugal. And so it was really great to see a community start forming around the ideas of DevOps over there. And we have, I think, more than 4,000 members now. So that's really great. But over time, and when I started working with Matthew, so we met at the conference in 2015, and Matthew had already started talking about DevOps topologies. And I found that fascinating because, again, was looking at the team side and what are the challenges to improve the way that organizations work and get things done, basically. And so I started working with Matthew as well. And again, we were working around DevOps and continuous delivery, but often clients thought what they need is better tooling and better practices. And that's really just the start of the story. You always end up realizing, actually, there are problems here in terms of how teams interact or don't interact, and lack of understanding of the purpose of team and who are their customers and things like this. So it was around that time that I got started to really focus more and more on team design and interactions.
Yeah, really cool to hear that DevOps Lisbon is 4,000 plus members. That's awesome. And with the team topology stuff, definitely, probably not talked about enough as you think about solutions for moving faster and that type of thing. Matthew, for you, in addition to coining the term team topologies, that somewhat describes how teams are arranged into an organization, you're a well-recognized name in the DevOps community. But when I was doing some research for this pod, I also saw that you have a master's degree from Oxford in neuroscience. How has your experience in that field informed your work in software and org design?
That's a great question. Thank you. So yeah, my first degree was from University of Reading in the UK in cybernetics and computer science. On this computer science side, the core ideas around networking and operating systems and writing software and all that kind of stuff. But I also did a bunch of stuff around cybernetics, which is control systems, basically the science of control theory, feedback loops, that kind of thing. But it was applied to all sorts of different situations. We obviously in the lab we did experimental stuff with electronics and things that are easy to experiment with. But the theory was applied. Well, the principles were applied to situations like organizations, in fact, but also planets, so planetary science, and we did some stuff around psychology and so on. So systems as a general principle. Some of that stuff got me interested in how the brain works. I went and I got a scholarship actually to do the master's in Oxford, master's in neuroscience. Now, the word neuroscience nowadays, 20 years later, can mean something a bit popular, a bit like popular science about how people think the brain works. It doesn't mean that, certainly didn't mean that back then. It meant this is biology, this is experimental biology. How does the brain work? How do we understand? How do we perceive? And I think my experience there informed the Team Topology stuff, informed how I approach these things on a few different levels. It helped me get some interesting insights into kind of individual psychology, the kind of, in particular, how perception works. So perception as in seeing, listening, touch, that kind of some of the ways in which perception can be modulated. So it gave me insights into sort of how individual animals can sense things. And that's certainly something we've applied to the organization as a whole, kind of the organization as an organism. We talk about the sensing organization. And I certainly see many organizations as effectively blind. Imagine like an amoeba, also like proto-animal that basically doesn't have any eyes or doesn't have any ability to sense anything. It just bumps around in its environment. And that's what lots of organizations seem like to me, because they don't have any real way of sensing how things are working. But also actually at a bit more detailed level, a lot of people think that the brain it's got millions and millions of nerve cells, neurons, and they just think they're all interconnected. Some people think each cell is somehow connected to every other cell. It's just a big kind of interconnection. And that's just not true at all. And that the brain has got very specific connectivity between different kind of neurons and nerve cells. And it's that kind of specificity, that kind of specific sort of connectivity that is part of the reason why particularly human brains, but animal brains and so on are so amazing. There's some very specific kind of interactions between different parts of the brain that definitely influenced my thinking on the 3 interaction modes that we talk about in Team Topologies and the 4 specific types of team. I'm not trying to recreate the brain, but there's definitely different kinds of brain cells and there's different kinds of interactions between them. And I'm pretty sure that influenced my thinking in terms of the different team types and interaction modes for sure.
Amazing and super fascinating stuff. I always love how a lot of the guests come on here and their past experience will influence what they do with their book or the way that they perceive a system or something like that. Really fascinating. And I wonder if you've ever described to an organization in your consulting, like, hey, you're like an amoeba right now, and we'd like to see we'd like to see you more like this. I don't know how that would go over.
Might not go down so exactly like that, but yeah.
Yeah. So, the two of you have been working together, for several years now, and you wrote the book together, the Team Topologies book, which has been recognized as a top new product management and business book. So doing really well there. Manuel, would you mind giving us a quick intro into the book and how it came to be?
Sure. Like I said earlier, we were doing consulting with clients around the world back in 2015 until 2018, more or less, which is when we were actually writing the book. And then it came out in 2019. Effectively, this consulting work and also looking at what other organizations were describing, in particular at the DevOps Enterprise Summit that happens every year, we were seeing some of the patterns that were working and helping teams get work done more efficiently, with faster flow, with better feedback loops. And we were also seeing some of the patterns that didn't work so well. And we felt that it was important and there was a lack of having a structured body of work, if you like, that was talking about this. I think it was Jeff Susna who said that we did the DevOps homework around how to organize teams and interactions, which is something that no one really had talked much about because it's maybe not so easy. And so some people say Team Topology is a framework, a DevOps framework. Other people say it's a methodology. I tend to look at it as it's a collection, starting with constraints. What are some things that we need to be aware of when we're trying to organize teams for fast flow? Things like Conway's Law, the fact that there are different trust boundaries, that it's not the same to be part of a team, 7 people, compared to be part of a group of 20, 30 up to 50 people, and so on. So the different boundaries of trust. Things like cognitive load, that teams have a limit on how much cognitive capacity they have. And so we should be mindful of that when we're assigning work, when we're making demands on teams. So those are the constraints. And then we talk about what Matthew already mentioned, some useful ways to think about the types of teams. So what is the mission of different teams? How do we improve the interactions between teams, make them more intentional with clear goals for the interactions? And then also, how do we sense, which Matthew mentioned, does the organization able to sense when we actually need to course correct? Maybe we need some new kind of teams, or we need to have more of this sort of interactions to address some problems that we have. And so not just having the patterns of what types of teams interactions, but also how do we evolve this over time? We adapt continuously to new challenges rather than expecting that there is one single model for the organization that's going to work forever, because it doesn't.
Yeah, one way that I've seen the two of you describe your work as being practical, step-by-step adaptive model for org design. You've said that organizations need a team-first approach. And Matthew, you already brought up there's 4 fundamental team types. There's also 3 team interaction patterns. Matthew, can you talk to us about both your process for developing some of these models, and actually what are the models? Like, what are these team types?
So the starting point is what we call stream-aligned team. So it aligns to a stream of change inside the organization, whatever that kind of stream of change is. In other words, there's a kind of continuous flow of software systems, so software changes. And the streamlined team is a starting point. It has end-to-end responsibility for a particular, say, product or service or domain or thing that we're building. And end-to-end, in other words, there are no handoffs. We're not handing off to anyone. And that's because handoffs between one team to another is one of the worst blockers to a fast flow of change. You can model that mathematically using some of the principles from people like Donald Reinertsen and mathematical queuing theory and things, or you can just look at it in an organization and say, each team is waiting on multiple other teams. I mean, in some organizations, what's called flow efficiency, which is the amount of time that teams actually spend doing real work, is incredibly low. A typical flow efficiency for lots of organizations is 15%, 15%, which means that 85% of the time, the vast majority of the time, is not spent doing work, is spent waiting on other teams. That's just incredibly ineffective, incredibly inefficient as well. And so what we're trying to do is to set up our organization for a fast flow of change. So our starting point is a streamlined team, end-to-end responsibility for everything in relating to that bit of software. They've got a cross-functional mix of skills, and the other 3 team types are really there to support and help and enable the streamlined. The only reason to have what we call an enabling team, what we call a complicated subsystem team, and what we call a platform team is really to help achieve a fast flow of changes in these multiple different stream-aligned teams. Those changes need to be compliant and rapid and safe. In other words, done in a way which is not breaking the systems. We're not leaking data, and we're compliant in terms of financial compliance or data compliance or whatever. But that's the only reason. So, for example, what we call a platform, the only reason to have a platform really is to enable a rapid flow of change in the teams that are using the platform. In the past, people might have used a platform for doing things like consolidating licenses or sharing infrastructure or whatever. Those things are fine, but not for us, not the starting point for why you should have something like an internal platform. It changes the viewpoint if you start with a fast flow of change and the realization you need to limit cognitive load inside these teams. You can't just keep piling on more and more stuff. You can't just ask a team to be responsible for more and more things. At some point, you've reached the limit of their cognitive ability, and then you've got a choice. What do you do? So that was our reasoning around these 4 different types of team. We wanted to find the smallest number of different kinds of team to make it much clearer so that people can have more directed conversations about whether some activity is a good thing or a bad thing. A streamlined team has long-term ownership of a particular part of the system. Platform team is more like a grouping of other teams, but again, that has long-term ownership of a kind of platform product. Complicated subsystem team it works on something with very specific skills, typically around mathematics type skills. Maybe it's video processing, it's some complicated logic, and those 3 types of team all build and run something. The enabling team does not own any piece of software. They are there as experts to typically help streamline teams to increase their knowledge, increase their awareness, adopt a new approach, something like that. And the enabling teams act as a boundary spanner, spanning across multiple kind of organizational boundaries to detect when there are kind of problems, to understand when we need to invest in new skills, when we need to build something new in the platform, when we need to decommission something.
Totally understand. Manuel, can you highlight some examples of organizations that you think are excelling at this type of team development and how they're being organized?
Yeah, so we actually have on our website, teamtopologies.com, we have some industry examples, which are quite interesting in the ways in which different organizations have used not just team topologies, but also other approaches to inform their organization design and evolution. So for example, we have Food Asylum. So what they did was look at team topologies together with Wordley mapping, which is a sort of a way of thinking, strategizing in terms of how are products going to evolve, both customer-facing products and internal products, so that we make better decisions in terms of what should we build, what should we rent or buy, and how these things are going to evolve over time. So they did really interesting work, not just applying the team patterns that we talk about, but also actually thinking about their portfolio, thinking about where we are now and what we think is going to happen. Because for different stages, if you like, of a given product, you might need to adapt the teams as well. If now we had a product which now is mostly something that we rent or we use as a third party rather than build ourselves, then the kind of teams we need change, or the team that maybe was responsible for that product now can have different responsibilities. So that's quite an interesting example. They also used a platform and focus a lot on that. There's also another one from a company called Pure Gym, which they applied multiple ideas from team topologies, understanding the stream. So that's actually something many people, I would say, overlook a bit when they read the book. We actually need to start with understanding what are the business streams, like what are the value streams. And when we're talking about software monoliths, actually, I would suggest inside any software monolith, there's a business monolith, right? There's a tangling of different business concepts probably inside that monolith. And so we actually need to start identifying different streams of value that are more or less independent, so that we can then align teams to those independent streams. And that's what Pure Gym did, which I thought was pretty interesting. And also they realized that we can sit down and think about what is a good model for us today, but there's nothing like actually trying it out and seeing, if we align teams to this sort of model, and then actually building in the time to realize and discover, does this work? Does this help us or not? Because you see many organizations where they make a decision and they change their teams. They do that decision as if it's a given that it's going to be better. And you don't know until you actually try it. And so when we have a few other examples as well, more around platforms, companies like USwitch and Cross, and we're obviously working with different clients. And so hopefully some of those will become industry examples as well that we can put on teamtopologies.com.
Yeah, that's really interesting. A lot of the teams that I'm working with or orgs in our community at Linear B, they talk about what they call like the Spotify model, which typically means I'm trying to break up my software teams into these I think you would call them streamlined teams that have all the capabilities needed to deliver end to end. One of the questions that I get from the community often is, how should I think about quality, or where should I put QA or automation? Do you have an opinion of where that type of work should go?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely, it should not be a separate team. So fundamental starting point, fast flow change, avoid handoff. So do not hand work from one team to another. That will absolutely kill a flow of change. That means, traditionally speaking, lots of organizations for some reason had a separate testing or QA department. That's a bad thing anyway, but it's definitely bad when we need a fast flow of change. But it also goes for a separate operations department. If you've got a separate kind of group of people who are running the software, who are on call for that software and are running it in the live systems, that is also effectively a handover. You're handing over software from development to operations. I mean, that's why the whole DevOps movement came out 15 years ago, whatever it is. And that model is well understood not to be very effective for lots of reasons. So fundamentally, yes, you should not have any handovers of the work from one team to another before that software goes live, or even after the software goes live, really. It should be the same team. Build and run for software is the way that gets the tightest feedback loops and aligns the best incentives for things like operability and reliability. But some other potential some other potential sort of awkward patterns for teams is where they're aligned around technology. That can also be less good as well. Are you aligned around a particular programming language? Are you aligned around a particular, I don't know, cloud provider or database technology, something like that? In particular, having a separate kind of database administration or database programming team separate from the applications that we're building on it, sort of generally speaking, doesn't really work. Not with a fast flow of change. If you're in an organization that is doing something possibly like traditional research and development, R&D, and you do not need a fast flow of change, then some of the Team Topologies ideas might not be suitable, might not be needed, or might not work. Totally fine. But for any organization that's using software to differentiate its services and needs a rapid flow of change and to be able to course correct very quickly, for example, to address a zero-day vulnerability and get a patch or a fix out for that really quickly, which is, to be honest, it's a lot of organizations in pretty much every single sector, then a fast flow of change is what we should be aiming for. And so therefore, we avoid these handoffs from one team to another. Right.
A lot of teams are now going fully remote, especially software teams. Some of that has happened because of the COVID, outbreak. Some teams were already like that before the pandemic. For software teams that are working fully remote, does this concept that you're talking about still hold up, or is there any lessons that you all learned as more and more teams are going into a remote, more asynchronous model?
So yes, we found that most of the, if not everything in the book is very applicable to remote work. There's only one small part where we talk about how to set up the physical environment to promote better interactions between teams. But the ideas are applicable in remote setup. In fact, what some organizations are starting to realize, at least the ones that want to understand how do we leverage the remote work to our advantage rather than trying to replicate the office way of working into the remote, which doesn't always work very well. But the ones that are actually actively trying to leverage the remote or hybrid and in their benefit, they realize that we need even more kind of intentional ways of teams to interact, to collaborate, to have better understanding of how they're related to other teams, how do they find information that they need. So things that we talk about in the book, like the team API, thinking about trust boundaries, also in virtual communication space. So the virtual workspace also needs to take into consideration there are different trust boundaries depending on the size of groupings of teams. So yeah, in general, what we've seen is that organizations are even more interested in the ideas of team topologies because it helps them deal with this new model of remote or hybrid work.
Yeah, a lot of the teams are looking to transform the way that they're set up, designed, how they worked. Some of those older school traditional, like I would call them siloed models, as you're saying, are not working as well. Manuel, what are the first steps for organizations that want to begin some type of transformation to move to these more streamlined, effective structures?
Yeah, it's interesting because we recently created a couple of infographics because we get this question quite often. And again, on our website, teamtopologies.com/infographics, you will find them. Obviously, there's a lot of context for each organization that needs to be taken into account. But at a kind of high level, if you like, you can think about, okay, first of all, we need to agree that we want to achieve fast flow. If Matthew was saying, there might be some situations where that is not the goal, and then maybe Team Topology is not what you need to be looking at necessarily. But most organizations need faster flow. They need to get changes quickly to customers, as well as respond quickly to problems. So assuming we agree that's what the organization is trying to achieve, then you can start identifying what kind of teams you have today and how do those teams fit into the patterns that we talk about in the book, the 4 fundamental types of teams. Because again, having clarity on what kind of teams we have is going to help us understand what are we able to do as an organization, as well as what are the bottlenecks, what are the things we need to address. And so when we do that sort of mapping, if you like, and we start looking at where more this team is a streamlined team, but maybe they don't have enough awareness of how to run their service in live environment, and so they need more kind of operational awareness, or maybe they don't actually have enough awareness on the product side and on what the customers need, and so maybe that's where they need to expand their abilities, and the same for other types of teams. So that's what people tell us, that the book really helps them have this sort of initial conversations around what is our purpose as a team, what are the gaps that we have today, and that's why the patterns in the book are useful. It's not just to say we are a streamlined team. That by itself doesn't really bring you any advantage. It's because we get the clarity on what are we trying to achieve, what are the gaps today. And so once you have those sort of more, start to have that understanding of how we align to the fundamental topologies and types of teams, then you can also start looking at where are teams overloaded with cognitive load. And so what can we do about that? How do we help these teams reduce their cognitive load so that they can actually be more productive by not having to do so much context switching, being expected to know too many things, by having either enabling teams or platform teams helping them upskill and abstract some of the details around lower level concerns that maybe a platform can help. Again, with a focus on reducing cognitive load, not necessarily about having some shared services, but actually looking at what are the problems that the teams have today and how do we address those. And then you can look at other things like Conway's Law and starting to see if we want to achieve some kind of systems and architecture for these systems, how should we align the teams to achieve that. And then obviously introduce the interaction modes as well and make sense of what is happening in the organization, right? Whenever maybe 2 teams were expected to collaborate to find some solution to a common problem, if that collaboration went wrong or felt awkward because maybe it took way longer than we expected, or we didn't actually find a solution, or the 2 teams have very different understanding of the problem, if you like. And so maybe there's a problem in the skills of the different teams. Maybe one team is more experienced than another. Whatever it is that made the interaction awkward, that we use that to inform how we need to evolve. Maybe in some cases, a given team needs help from an enabling team to actually learn a bit more about, let's say infrastructure as code, so that they can actually collaborate with other teams around infrastructure as code. Because if they don't have the skills, then that collaboration is not going to work very well. And so we're evolving the interactions and the team structures and the capabilities based on that sort of ongoing feedback. So that's one way to get started. Obviously, in some organizations, they start somewhere else, or we also have people who maybe are individual contributors and they ask us, I agree with the ideas, but I'm not a manager. I'm not going to decide on teams. And so there are aspects of Team Topologies that anyone can start with, like the team API, right? A team can decide we want to make it clear for other teams. What is our purpose? How do we like to communicate, and what practices we follow? So we start making these sort of interactions with other teams clear, even if we're just part of an individual team.
We do actually have, we've got a lot of stuff on our GitHub. If you go to github.com/teamtopologies, you'll find a whole lot of open source Creative Commons materials on there, free to use. Basically, you've got like a template library for drawing. We've got example playbook type material. So have a look there, and there's a lot of material to get started and be inspired. We've also got some infographics. If you head to teamtopologies.com/infographics, you'll find a couple of, at the moment, we've got 2 infographics online that should give you some ideas for getting started too. We are working on some more comprehensive kind of getting started or what we're calling pathway materials, a kind of combination of different suggestions depending on what your challenge is. So that those pathways will be coming out over the rest of 2021 and into 2022.
Very cool. One of the topics that keeps coming up, you're talking about boundaries or trust boundaries and how organizational trust boundaries should inform business decision making. I believe you've highlighted that smaller teams with high trust lead to fast flow. Matthew, can you talk about that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, so if we want a fast flow of change, we need to look at the human conditions under which that can take place. And one of the most important factors for a group of people being able to make decisions quickly and so on is to have high degree of trust. And it turns out that as human beings, there are some kind of natural, if you like, natural boundaries for trust in terms of the size of the group that we're in. And this seems to relate to our whatever anthropological heritage going back millions of years, whatever. The details at one level don't. The details are super interesting, but they don't really matter. What we need to do is to try and assess and understand where these boundaries seem to be. And this is where the research from Robin Dunbar comes in. He has looked at trust boundaries in human beings and actually in other primates to try and assess, look at these different kind of groupings. It seems to relate to how many kind of relationships we can really maintain as human beings with other people. And there are several of these boundaries. The most famous one is at around about 150 people. That's what has been called Dunbar's number. We seem to be able to maintain, it seems that we can't generally maintain more than about 150 kind of relationships of a meaningful type. And that even applies to online as well, even applies to things like Facebook and Twitter and what have you. The original research was done in kind of face-to-face relationships, but repeated the research with online settings and looked at the actual interactions that were happening rather than just the number of friends on Facebook you have, which is not massively meaningful. So the implications of all this kind of research are that there are different kind of, a bit like an onion. Imagine an onion, you chop it in half, you see all the different rings, the circles of inside the onion. And we've got something similar in social situations where there are different kind of trust boundaries at the very middle of the onion, if you like, or the organization. You've got trust boundaries around about something like, the research is difficult to pin down, but it's somewhere around 5, perhaps 8 people is extremely high trust. And therefore, if we've got extremely high trust in that unit, if we can develop extremely high trust in that unit, we're able to move very quickly. Now, in some organizations, they find that they could actually have slightly larger groupings, maybe up to about 15 people, and still move very quickly. Fine. Okay. If you've got the organizational context to do, that's fine. But there does seem to be a bit of a boundary around about 15 people. If you think about it, there's almost no sports in the world that have more than 15 people on the field. Australian rules football, it seems to be one, but we can make an excuse for the Australians. I'm joking. But if you think about kind of American football, would it be fair to say there's kind of 3 different groups? In rugby, obviously from the UK, there's two different groups inside a single team on the field. There's forward and back, and so on. And so we have to be mindful of these kind of trust boundaries when we're thinking about different groups in the organization, if we want to maintain a fast flow of change. So it helps us to think about, if we want this fast flow and trust is a key enabler for fast flow, then we need to start looking at trust boundaries and the implications.
Excellent. And Manuel, you talked a little bit about cognitive load and limiting that. How do you know if a team has reached that cognitive load, and what do you do in that situation if the load is too high?
Yeah, it's a good question. So effectively, you pointed to the fact that we need to start by assessing what is the cognitive load on teams, right? It's one of the things that many people identify very strongly with what we talk in the book about team cognitive load. And they say, yes, my team is overloaded. There's so much we need to be aware of. There's so much we're supposed to be responsible for, but we don't have the bandwidth. And that's because their cognitive load is way too high. We actually have, so Matthew mentioned the GitHub repositories at github.com/team topologies. There's one around which has an example of a simple survey that we can run with teams it's effectively more of a conversation starter that we start discussing what are the things that are complicated for you in terms of that end-to-end ownership of the service. Is it difficult to test, or is it difficult to support your service, or is it difficult to understand if what you're building is helpful or not for the customers? So can be a variety of things where the team is struggling. And obviously also we might have a team that has too large part of a system that they're responsible for. So if basically there's too much code that you need to be responsible for, then you probably don't have enough understanding to actually support it effectively. So when problems happen, you're probably going to be struggling a little bit to fix them effectively in a fast way. So we have this team cognitive load assessment example. You need to adapt it to your own context, right? So there will be some things which are specific to your business, things that teams should know that you want to assess if they have a problem with. But then you have all the sort of more technical aspects of the software lifecycle that are more common across different organizations. So you can start by assessing the cognitive load on teams. You start identifying some sort of trends where, oh yeah, actually, it seems like multiple teams are struggling with, I don't know, with scaling their applications or monitoring or whatever it might be. And so it looks like we either need to help them gain more awareness and knowledge around these areas, or maybe they need some helpful platform services so they have less to worry about. So they can rely on platform that is built as a product for those teams to consume. So depending on where the cognitive load is too high, what is causing that, then we might have different approaches, which are effectively why we have the supporting types of teams that we talked earlier and the interaction modes to get the evolution of the teams and reducing cognitive load. And then there are other things like the team API also helps reduce cognitive load for other teams to understand how do we work, how can they communicate with us, what kind of channels we prefer, or when are we available, and these sort of things also reduces cognitive load in terms of communication between different teams. I think most of the patterns and ideas we talk about in the book that can be applied are effectively helping minimize cognitive load for some of the teams in the organization.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that with us. And now the other thing, Manuel, that you've brought up a few times here is Conway's Law. And kind of a high-level way to understand that is the way that your teams are set up will reflect in the way that the software is architected and built. Some of our listeners may not be fully familiar with this. Can you break it down a little bit for us?
Yeah, I like how Michael Nygaard talks about that. So he wrote the book Release It, which is also a strong reference for us. And he says when you deliver a product to your clients, you're actually, or you deploy the product, you're actually deploying your organizational structures in it. So that kind of, I think, gives a more kind of visual idea of what Conway's Law is, which is coming from a paper by Mel Conway in 1968. So it's nothing recent, but especially with the rise of microservices, there was a lot more attention put into it. Partially, I think, because many organizations tried microservices expecting it would help them to go faster and everything is going to go much smoother. But actually, if you don't align the team structures and the communications between teams to actually match the system architecture, then the team structures have more influence in the end, right? What the system you are able to build and deliver looks more like the structures you have in the organization than whatever sort of idealized architecture you designed in the beginning. And so that's what Conway's Law is telling us, that we cannot, it's not a one-to-one relationship, but we cannot expect to build some system architecture without thinking of which team structures and communication makes sense to make that happen and enable that to happen. It's not that we cannot build this architecture that we designed, but it might cost a lot more. It might be a lot more challenging if the teams are not organized in a way that supports the architecture. So what you mentioned earlier, if you have separate QA teams and you have separate teams for different functions, and that's not going to help you achieve fast flow and teams that can build different parts of the system more effectively and faster.
And Matthew, following up on that, how can you use the reverse Conway approach that you outlined to produce software system architectures that are sustainable by an organization?
So the idea with this reverse Conway is if there is this mirroring effect between the communication pathways between different parts of the organization and the likely software architectures can be produced, then, hey, why don't we work out what kind of architecture we want and then change our organization to reflect that? So at least we're not fighting against Conway's Law. That's the principle. Now, just changing your organization communication pathways and things doesn't guarantee that you'll get better architecture. There's a whole bunch of stuff you've got to do. You've got to be technically competent and so on. But at least we're not acting against that force. Now, it could be quite challenging, right? Because the current organization is likely to have built software which perhaps is not optimized for a fast flow of change. In which case, if you change the organization first, you have to be ready and willing to change the software architecture. So that kind of implies, are you going to do that in a big bang approach, or are you going to take it piece by piece? Well, you're going to do it piece by piece because a big bang is almost certainly never going to work for lots of reasons. So you're expecting an incremental approach to reverse Conway anyway. Start with one service, perhaps, change how the teams are arranged around that, or start with one domain or one part of the organization or one part of the product or whatever. And make sure you're measuring the outcomes. Use things like the 4 key metrics from Accelerate book, State of DevOps report. And we generally recommend using those 4 key metrics, which is lead time, deployment frequency, mean time to recovery, and change fail percentage, but also add on flow efficiency. We talked about that before. So the amount of time that the team actually spends doing work compared to not doing work. That's a starting point. There are other metrics that you'd want in place, but those are starting points which actually work pretty well. But the organization needs to expect to invest in substantial technical skills to be able to make that kind of architecture switch. But also the organization really needs to understand its business domain. The organization needs to understand, if it's a for-profit company, the organization needs to understand how it actually makes money, which parts of its business domain actually make money. And you'd be surprised, maybe you wouldn't be surprised, how many organizations really can't answer that question. They don't know which features or which products or which bits of their kind of system actually are super valuable and which part actually either have a neutral effect or even cause a reduction in revenue. And yeah, but loads of organizations don't even forget about the revenue. Loads of organizations don't even understand what the purpose of that organization is. That there's a real lack of clarity of purpose, a real lack of clarity of terminology from a business perspective. And that's where approaches like domain-driven design are really important, DDD. Because the purpose of domain-driven design at one level is to untangle the business concepts to enable us to write software in a way which is less tangled. If the business concepts are tangled, we are going to write tangled software, guaranteed. So untangle the business concepts so that we've got a fighting chance of writing software which is also untangled and therefore enables a faster flow of change. So you've got to invest, the organization's got to invest in areas outside of kind of technology as well. As in, they've got to have a commitment to untangling their business concepts and understanding how their business actually works. And you'd be surprised, maybe not. Plenty of organizations don't really understand that, and they're going to struggle. So it needs some commitment. If you want to go quickly, you're going to have to invest.
Yeah, super interesting stuff. I want to thank you both. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the pod today and telling us more about Team Topologies and also how we can improve and get to a more streamlined approach.
No problem. It's been great to be here. We'd just like to, again, the Team Topologies Academy. So if you go to academy.teamtopologies.com, you'll get there. And over time, there'll be more and more courses that people can take, all self-paced video training, all either featuring me and Manuel, or at the very least curated by me and Manuel from a very strong Team Topologies perspective.
Yeah. And the other reference is teamtopologies.com that we mentioned. So all the Creative Commons and examples and infographics is all there.
Absolutely. Yeah. So everyone who's listening, definitely check out Team Topologies Academy and teamtopologies.com, and be sure to join the Dev Interrupted Discord community. That's where we keep this type of conversation going all week long. You can find all of this information in the links below. And guys, thanks again for coming on the pod.
No problem. Thank you.
It was fun. Thank you.